This week, California schools at it again, promoting transgenderism in 4-year-olds. And why is the FCC fast-tracking the purchase of 200 American radio stations by a foreign ownership group? And our panel weighs in on the only vice presidential debate of 2024. These stories and plenty more on deck this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann is the managing editor, Adam Wittenberg, a staff writer with The Lion, and Valerie Cabana is a media contributor also here at The Lion. Welcome to all of you today, panel, as we jump into this week's vice presidential debate. It's the only one of its kind, coupled with one presidential debate before it. It looks like that's all we're going to see of these four candidates. I guess I'll just volley it to the panel. Valerie, we'll start with you. You have any takeaways from this week's debate?
Yeah, it was a bit of fresh air, honestly. But I do want to kind of touch on one thing that J.D. Vance said, who I think did a great job. And I loved how civilized it was. But something that he mentioned was how China is paying workers $3 a day. And this came up in the dispute of, are we going to start making more things on American soil? Are we going to produce tariffs on imported goods, which we know a majority comes from China? And so I actually had a little bit of a personal experience. I lived in Uganda at one point, and the Chinese people own over 36 factories in Uganda. And one thing that I got to learn is that those workers, if they work an 8-hour day, they only get paid $2.70. But most of them work around a 14-hour day so that they can make a little bit of overtime. It's not a lot, just so that they can live with their families. And a lot of families are big families. And so one thing I got to learn is how China actually has so much control in third world countries. And I want to bring awareness to that, because what the Republican ticket is attempting to do is to keep them out of America so that they're not able to have that control. And this is something that's incredibly important just because of what I've seen. And I know a lot of Americans have not seen this firsthand, but I have, and I know how destructive it is to a country when another country comes in and they're taking over economically.
You know, it's a great point, Valerie. I have talked with Simon Atiba, who used to be part of the White House press corps. He reported for Africa News One, I believe was the organization's name. And one of the things he told me similarly was China is aggressively moving into African nations, taking them over, paying slave wages, as you just said. But more importantly, it's the rare earth minerals. They want access to that, and that's what so much of our electric vehicle economy is being poured into, the extraction of these rare earth minerals, and China controls a lot of it. That was J.D. Vance's point, was if we want to control pollution and other greenhouse gas emissions, let's make them here at home, because China doesn't care. Josh, did you have a take on the debate overall?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting this morning. You know, I was looking at some of the reaction to the debate, and I looked at the New York Times. They usually will have their columnists, 9 or 10 of their columnists, rate who they think won, and usually it's pretty predictable. But they were overwhelmingly voted in favor of Vance. They kind of had this chart. I think he did come across as the stronger, more articulate candidate. I think he made a strong case for Trump's policies, arguably as strong, maybe even stronger than the presidential candidate himself. And so I think that came across. Hopefully, voters are paying attention to the actual policies that these men represent and their ticket. And we'll just have to see when it comes to November what the voters decide.
You know, Adam, I bring you in today with probably our first story of the show as well, which is Christian schools' approach. You know, we talk a lot, obviously, about Christian education on this show, and you've actually written a piece about not just the election, but how Christian schools are discussing this coming election. It was fascinating. What'd you find?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I found that some Christian schools want to just stay out of politics completely, but the professor and a high school social studies and history teacher that I talked to kind of recommended against that. And they said, especially as a Christian school, it's okay to talk about biblical values. It's okay to come down on the side of truth. Now, it's not the same as saying, well, you must vote for this person or I'm voting for this person. But the teacher at a Christian high school I talked to was like, hey, I tell my students, this candidate believes this, which is against the Bible, but this other candidate also has these issues. And I think healthy dialogue is important and something that we need more of in this country and certainly in Christian schools.
I will say, from my pastor's perspective, he has said repeatedly, you cannot sit on the sidelines on issues, moral issues like abortion, for instance, Adam, and I wonder if Christian school leaders feel the same in many cases.
Yeah, I think that it's got to be a hard line to walk as a Christian school leader because you want to keep your audience engaged. You want to keep your parents sending their kids to the school. And if you take a hardline stance or maybe come out a little too strong on something, you might offend some of your constituents. But think of the alternative. If we are raising up these young people and we're not causing them to stand for truth, or we're not modeling that, and even modeling respectful disagreements, not modeling, hey, we believe this, or this is our interpretation of the Bible. We understand some people feel differently. That's healthy. That's maturity. And I would encourage or hope that more Christian school leaders and teachers are doing things like that.
Story number 2, and I would just say to Governor of Maine, Governor Mills, we'll take the check. There's an allegation floating out there, Josh, that Governor Mills of Maine is paying media a lot of money for positive coverage. Like I said, we'll take a couple of bucks. What do you say?
Yeah, and there are receipts for this, and so the Mills administration is paying about $120,000 to this trust, which owns the Portland Press Herald. The trust is called the Maine Trust for Local News, and they've got a contract worth $117,000 for what the government calls a marketing campaign, essentially for public education. Does this sound like state-sponsored news? I mean, this is scary 1984 stuff here, and so there was some great reporting by the Maine Wire on this, and some Freedom of Information requests, and it's as alarming as it sounds. This news org, by the way, Maine Trust for Local News, guess who some of its supporters are? It includes George Soros's Open Society Foundations. We may talk about him again today, as well as the Gates Family Foundation and the Google News Initiative. And so I would tell our audience, when it comes to news, you have to put on your critical thinking hat. You have to look at where the money is. And, the other thing is the news outlet says that, well, our reporters we don't tell them what to write. Well, clearly here you've got the government paying for what it wants them to write, and that's scary.
This is a really important and broader question, and it's something that I've discussed for years in my broadcast career. Josh, should readers, consumers of media understand who the product they're consuming works for, where their paychecks and money are coming from? I think that's fair and probably important. For instance, we make no bones about the fact the Herzog Foundation underwrites our efforts. We understand what the Herzog Foundation is. We're transparent about that. Isn't that important to an audience?
Yeah, and we do that all the time in The Lion. When we, for example, you host a show called Making the Leap, and sometimes we will write an article based on one of your guests, and we will acknowledge the fact that both The Lion and Making the Leap are part of the Herzog Foundation. We try to be clear and transparent, and it's important for people in America today to know where their news is coming from, know who the publisher is, know that they have a perspective, and that's going to come through.
Another day, another crazy teacher in California, Valerie, which, by the way, I have to say, I'm sort of amazed that anybody who's a progressive or on the left today is paying media for positive coverage. I thought that just came with the deal. But anyway, I pivot. What's going on in California with yet another story of transgender activism?
Yeah, so this transgender teacher of 4-year-olds told them in a classroom setting it is okay for boys to wear dresses if they feel like it. And he also shared other inappropriate materials with them, and including a worksheet that had kids with their pronouns listed beside them. And, once again, we're talking about 4-year-olds. It is never appropriate to share these things with 4-year-olds. If parents want to do it, that's okay, but it should not be happening at school. That is not education. That is indoctrination. And to teach that you can be gender fluid, or whatever term you want to use, is an insult to God, and it's harming our country.
I was actually kind of interested that this subject did not come up at all, talking about the vice presidential debate earlier in the week, Adam. I know kids were talked about during the debate. It was mainly through the prism of child care. Certainly there was a lot of time spent on abortion. This subject seems pretty relevant given all that we talk and cover here at the Lion about it.
Well, it kind of relates to what we were talking about just a minute ago, with media tending to be partisan, like working for the liberal or often Democratic side, and sometimes even getting paid to do it. And some of the coverage I was looking at today said they weren't that surprised, because certainly the presidential debate was heavily slanted, or the moderators and the structure, toward Kamala Harris. And then this one, CBS, didn't do that much better as far as leaning toward, Tim Walz and the Democrat position. So a question like gender fluidity and transgenderism in schools very much hits on the Republican or conservative agenda and the voter base. So it's actually not surprising that the liberal media would not even include the question, because they don't want to give any ground to the Trump-Vance ticket.
And when it comes to these cultural issues, Josh, I mean, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, is really at the center of it. I know you guys have covered stories specifically about Walz in Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota's taken a number of alarming positions. I mean, positions that parents on both sides of the aisle find alarming and terrible, really. And that includes catering to students who might identify as another gender. He's sort of been criticized, sometimes a little bit in inflammatory ways, you might say, for putting tampons in the boys' restrooms. But these are real concerns that parents have. And, in this California story, this is transitional kindergarten, no pun intended. These are 4-year-olds. They've got basically a new grade in California for 4-year-olds before they get to kindergarten. And this is a transgender teacher who is basically sharing these personal things with them. And what you had at this board meeting were parents on one side saying, look, this teacher doesn't need to be telling our children these things. You had another teacher in that board meeting who defended the transgender person by saying we need to protect the LGBTQ community. Now, I don't dispute that every American deserves the chance for fairness. We don't want to discriminate against people. But we're talking about 4-year-olds. We're talking about what should a teacher be teaching children. And so I think the parents' rights have to be respected.
The next story is one that I have to confess is a personal one to me. After 25 years in broadcast radio and knowing the particulars of the company in which this story centers, that's Odyssey, 200 radio stations they own across the country. And I've worked for these folks for a time. And the story this week, and Adam, they've covered it here at the Lion, is the FCC fast-tracking Odyssey's purchase. It's about a 51% share, I understand it to be. The Soros Group has sort of helped bail them out of bankruptcy, which means effectively the Soros Group has controlling interest of 200 radio stations in the company known as Odyssey. Odds are many people who are watching this show or listening to it are in a market, in a city where Odyssey stations can be heard, specifically talk stations. I have more thoughts, but first yours, please.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very disturbing what's going on here, because the FCC is not even following its own protocols. And we have to ask why. Why are they fast-tracking this move right now? We are 30 days approximately from the election, and 200 media stations, radio stations, which is most of the U.S., is covered in some way. And we're talking about George Soros. So one of the things that we have to know here is there are laws in place that if a foreign entity wants to buy more than 25% stake in a U.S. media company, there has to be extra review, extra approval. You can't just walk in and buy it like a normal, consumer in the U.S., so to speak. And yet the FCC is like, oh, go ahead, no problem. We're not even going to review that now.
No secret, Josh, that many talk radio stations lean conservative. Many are concerned that a Soros purchase or controlling interest of talk stations means no more conservative talk. Fair worry or criticism?
Well, I think it is a fair worry, and 2 of the FCC board members have cried foul, and this was passed in a 3-2 vote, so it was a close vote. Also, Chip Roy from Texas, he calls this the Soros shortcut. There's a lot of concern, especially from the conservative side, about this. Why is George Soros' group interested in these stations. You know, you can hear people like Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Dan Bongino on some of these stations. Clearly, these are conservative talk show people who have huge audiences. Why is Soros interested in a controlling share of these companies? We know why. We know that he has a policy agenda, and he has spent his fortune to try to see these policies enacted. And so this is a big, long play media move, and I think it should concern all Americans, because even if you're on the left, you don't want the other side to be able to do this.
Yeah, and I happen to know personally, Odyssey is a company that its ownership group was already somewhat left of center, if not progressive. Soros purchasing these will probably go a long way to ensuring that the programming stays that way. Again, to me, free market, God bless America, but it is about transparency. Do audiences understand what they're listening to, who they're hearing, and why? I think that's the key. Transparency is always the key. Let's go to homeschooling, and a subject that is important to all of us because alternatives in education are exploding all over the country, homeschooling being the lead. But something I hear a lot, Adam, is about, or I should say Valerie, I'm sorry, I wanted to pivot to Valerie here for a minute and ask you about special needs kids in homeschooling, because this is something that I think a lot of people wonder, am I equipped as a homeschool parent to help kids who might have extra learning needs?
Yeah, and I would encourage you to check out some of the Herzog Foundation resources, because we are rolling out different things that can help parents who want to homeschool their children. But in this article specifically, we kind of go back and forth with the public education system and how it is still a one-size-fits-all box that puts kids in, whether you're special needs or not. And we know that that's not always the best situation for kids. And I have been in a public education special needs classroom, and every single one of those students have different special needs, and they are unique in their own way. And they need education in a way that differs from their special needs neighbor. And so I know that when they go into classes, oftentimes they have paras, and some low funding schools, they actually don't have anyone that goes into those classes with them, and they go by themselves. And so if we can explore homeschooling and if we can find the right resources, it actually might be better for those kids to get a better education.
We always like to wrap the show each week with a question for the panel. It's a simple one. What's your favorite story at readline.com? Adam, we start with you this week.
Yeah, well, I am going to choose Christian schools approaching politics, but I want to give a quick shout out to two other stories that are worth checking out, which is one on Sarah Huckabee Sanders and how she says being a mom actually makes her a better governor, and as well some findings about the fluoride levels in water being unsafe for children. So I'm going with Christian schools approaching politics because we do need to talk about this, and it's important.
Valerie, what do you like this week?
So the headline is, a mother warns against a Colorado law that prohibits a abortion reversal pill that actually saved her daughter's life. And so this mom, she actually took an abortion pill. She said she instantly regretted it, and she was able to find access to an abortion reversal pill that she took that actually saved her daughter's life. And now she's a mom, and she can't imagine life without her daughter. And the Bible tells us that before we were knit together in our mother's womb, that God knew us. He knew us before. He'll know us after. And so Colorado has actually decided that they're going to ban this abortion reversal pill and not provide access to it. And so we're pro women's health care, although it's not health care, it's murder, and we're anti saving lives. It doesn't make sense when you look at it from a legal perspective. It doesn't make sense when you look at it from a life and sanctity of life perspective. And so go check this story out, because it is a crucial issue and it's extremely important.
And I would just add, the vice presidential debate this week contained a lot of misinformation, to put it mildly, about this process, and women who have gone through taking this pill unsupervised, and well, I'll leave it at that. A lot of misrepresentation about that argument and debate. You should check that out for sure for yourself. And Josh, your favorite story of the week?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and tell you about a story that's coming down the pike, and our audience has to be watching for this one. There's a superstar softball player not too far from where we're sitting here, who's signing with a big-time college program known for wearing their Christian faith on their sleeve. It's exciting. I hope you watch for it.
Oh, very cool. Always keep up to date. Watch every single day at readline.com for great headlines like these we've discussed and so many more. For all of us at The Lion, we always appreciate you downloading the show, and we hope you'll come back next time.